Hello, everybody, and welcome to my podcast, Senior to Senior, where I dive into the stories of seniors. I explore their unique experiences, discuss the real issues facing seniors today, and introduce you to some of the most interesting people around the world that impact the senior journey. So I have the privilege to talk to a lot of people, and today I am talking with TRACY HANNIGAN, and TRACY is joining this podcast from the UK. I'm so glad to have you part of this. Welcome, TRACY,
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
and excited to have you. So let me tell my audience a little bit about you, and I'm sure we'll talk more about things that I don't know about you. But joining me today is TRACY HANNIGAN, a qualified sleep therapist recognized by the Society for Behavioral Sleep Medicine. TRACY has dedicated her career to helping individuals just like you break free from the chains of insomnia and other sleep challenges. With her evidence based approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, known as CBTI, and acceptance and commitment therapy for insomnia, known as ACTI, she empowers adults to not only regain the sleep they deserve, but to cultivate a lasting resilience against future sleep disturbances. TRACY knows the battle all too well. As someone who has faced her own serious insomnia challenges after losing a spouse and dealing with the complexities of life in her 30s, she transformed her own struggles into a mission to help countless others find their way back to restful nights without relying on medications. And so today we'll explore the profound relationship between aging and sleep, discuss strategies to combat sleep procrastination, and hopefully equip you with practical tips to enhance your bedtime routine. So, whether you're looking to improve your sleep quality or simply understand more about how age impacts our rest, there's something in this conversation for everyone. I love, TRACY, that you talk about your evidence-based approaches to things. You talk about that what you put forward is no nonsense, no fads, no pills, no sprays, and you say no kidding. So I think we're talking to the right person today to those things. So let me just start by a question that I think we all have. Um, and that deals with how much sleep does a person need. So, we hear growing up, we hear all of our life, you need 8 hours of sleep, you need this, you need that. Here in the United States, you're originally from New Hampshire, so you know our country. But Donald Trump, for example, says that he needs 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep. Some people need a lot more than that. Sometimes I feel guilty when I sleep for 10 hours. But how much sleep do we really need as adults?
That is a great question. Really, you're right, really common question. And it's a little bit of a myth that everybody needs 8 hours, although that seems to be the number everybody's hung up on. The need is genetically determined and it varies from individual to individual, and it varies across the lifespan as well. So if we get 6 hours of sleep, whether we get 8 hours of sleep or 9 hours of sleep, the number itself, in order to figure out the number for an individual,
Yeah.
we need to know like how long does it take us to fall asleep? If we fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, as we get older, that period of time can be longer, can be
Yes.
closer to 30 minutes or 45 minutes. If we wake up a couple of times in the night, long enough to remember it, we actually wake up lots of times at night, but we don't always remember it. It's just a function of how our safety system is built into our sleep.
Hmm.
And we wake up in the morning, and after we get going, if we have enough energy to do what we need to do during the day, whatever that number looks like is our number. And you're absolutely right. There are some people who are genetically short sleepers. The percentage of people who are carrying that particular combination of genes is very, very small.
Okay.
Really, really tiny.
Yeah.
Enough, it's small enough that if somebody says they only need like 4 or 5 hours, we're always going to pause and think about that, because a very tiny fraction of those people will really be in that category. But you go all the way up to like myself, I feel really good on 9 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
And I'm an early bird by nature, which is another variable that gets thrown in there. And there are night owls. So whatever that number is that gives you those three main characteristics of good sleep is the number that you need.
Yeah, yeah. And, my sleep used to be completely different than it is now. I'm almost 71. And so compared to when I was 30, it's completely different. And I'm sure it's changed. And, in reading your materials and looking at your website, which by the way is very thorough, and I'm not going to give your website out yet because I don't want anybody leaving this podcast to go to your website, but they should if they had it. But I'll make sure people have your website. I was interesting. It was interesting to find that older adults are many times nutritionally deficient, and that can affect their sleep as well. Am I right? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, there are a lot of different things that affect people who are older for a lot of different reasons that have an impact on their sleep. Um, uh, Gastric secretions tend to change, and we could kind of develop a little bit more of a tendency to malabsorb things as we get older. That can affect sleep. Um, Things like medications that are taken for other health conditions that are more common when people get older, those can impact sleep. Actually, sleeping medications can also negatively impact sleep, believe it or
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the sleep that we get on sleeping medications is not real sleep. And certain elements of sleep can become disrupted as a result of those.
Mhm.
The fact that health conditions that lead us to be more sedentary, those things can impact our sleep. And those things are all more common as we get older.
Yeah. So there's
Hormonal changes as well, starting from the 50s. So you start layering that in, and those things affect our sleep pretty directly. But the sleep itself also changes. You made a really good point. Your sleep is different now than it was in your 30s, and
yeah.
that wouldn't surprise me in terms of if you put a group of 30-year-olds and a group of 71-year-olds in a sleep lab, and you would see very different percentages of things like deep sleep and REM sleep. It's very, very common. So sleep changes throughout the lifespan in a normal, very functional way,
Mhm.
but it also can be impacted by these other factors that affect individuals very differently: their nutritional status, their health status, medications that they're taking, how active they are. All of those things will have an impact, more or less, depending on if they affect you or not.
Yeah, well, you mentioned your gut secretions or stomach secretions and so forth, right? Uh, when I was young, the only thing I thought about my gut was having pizza in it before I went to bed after partying,
Yeah.
half the night. So things have changed. But so listen, tell us a little bit about you. I didn't mean to skip over, I
Mm.
introduced you, but tell us about you and how the heck did you get here and why are you doing what you're doing?
Right. So way back in the day, I did a degree in psychology, and I worked in community mental health in California. And in working in that kind of environment, you naturally see this connection between mental health issues and sleep, and also sleep and mental health issues. So they feed into one another.
Mhm.
Um, and I was interested in sleep from a professional point of view at that point, but then I also was experiencing my own insomnia at the time. Obviously, with the death of a spouse, you expect to have disrupted sleep.
Yes.
But then I became very worried about the sleep itself, and that cycle began to feed. And so I went on for years having difficulty sleeping. Fast forward number of years, life stresses and things kind of cropped up another round of insomnia for me, and I managed to get through that using some of the approaches that I have come to learn. when I left the States and came to the UK, I trained as an osteopath. So, working in pain clinic settings, you also see people's sleep being impacted by their pain and people's pain being impacted by how good their sleep is or not. So, there's another bi-directional relationship there. And
Mhm.
so, I thought I really am interested in this from both angles. And I really wanted to spend some time studying the evidence based approaches. Being a clinician, is really important to me to work in an evidence-based way. And I really, really can't stand a lot of the hype and the spin and the fear mongering marketing that is kind of in the health space in general, especially online. So I think, I planted my flag in the sand, being an evidence-based practitioner, and I have I've really, really loved doing what I've done. I've gone online. We all should have probably bought stock in Zoom about 6 years ago, but I've been working that way ever since, and absolutely love it.
Yeah. So with all the information that's available online, right? There's so much information. Why do people still struggle with sleep? Why do, I mean, gosh, it's not for a lack of information. Why do people still struggle?
I think there are a few reasons. One main reason is that a lot of the information that's easily accessible to the majority of the population focuses on sleep hygiene. And if we look at and we're talking about, the kinds of things that are affect the outside in from sleep is the way I describe it. So have a dark room and have a cool room, and make sure you don't eat a large curry right before you lay down for bed. All those sorts of things, they're all fine in and of themselves, but they miss the mark when it comes to insomnia. And actually, sleep hygiene interventions are not recommended as a first line approach for insomnia. If you look at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they don't recommend it once somebody is in that cycle. By the time people are really looking for help with their sleep, they're often in that cycle, or they have some other kind of sleep disorder, which is also not going to be helped by sleep hygiene. Um, so people get this information, but it doesn't actually really apply to their situation. And so they get frustrated and they get upset and they get worried and they think, I'm doing all of the things right. I'm following all of the rules, right? And my sleep is still poor. There must be something wrong with me. Something must be going on. Their anxiety gets ramped up and the situation just begins to spiral a bit out of control. And so, actually, over focusing on some of the stuff that you can find online is actually more harmful than it is helpful. The information that is out there around sleep therapy, the evidence based approaches, it suffers from a slightly different problem in that a lot of what you see is based on the research, right? And there's a lot of research to support it. There's over 30 years of research that says that these approaches work. But the way that it's laid out a lot of times online, and it is very rigid, very rules based, very one size fits all, and sounds really scary to somebody who's struggling with their sleep. So you can get a lot of information, again, even about the evidence based approaches. But how do you apply that to your situation? It becomes difficult to apply, and then you feel like that. Well, that failed too. Boy, I must be really having a difficult time. And there's also a big difference between having loads of information and having the support to implement it. So I think you can't get that from a website, really. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that even evidence-based approaches, they lack the personalization that people need. And there are apps that can walk you through some of it, but it still is not, it's still very formulaic. It's still addressing numbers of hours of sleep and using formulas. And what I've found is by the time somebody's desperate enough to be engaged in that kind of activity, their anxiety is really high. And that has to often be addressed first in order to set them up for success.
And so, you know, you mentioned all the information, and there's an overload of information, and a lot of it incorrect. There's a lot of it. So, if somebody reaches out to you, at what point do people reach out to you? Is it when they're just concerned, or is it when they're desperate? Is it maybe both of those things? How do people reach out, and why do people reach out to you, and how do you serve people?
So people reach out usually much later than they ought to have been reaching out for support. Um, by the time somebody is willing to pay for one-to-one services, especially, in here in the UK, I'm competing against the NHS. And we don't have an insurance-based type of situation. So it's a little bit different. So by the time somebody's willing to do that, they're usually really desperate, really scared. They've been dealing with it for quite a long time. There will be the occasional person who has a really short bout of sleep disruption, which we would kind of consider typical for the situation that they are in, but because maybe they are anxious or very perfectionistic,
Hmm.
they immediately want to go the nth degree to quote unquote fix this huge problem that they have. So they're more driven by an innate anxiety rather than the sleep issue itself. And when anybody comes to me, I try to screen them for other sleep disorders because insomnia is only one of many sleep disorders, and my remit is insomnia and nightmare imagery rehearsal therapy for nightmares. So if it's something else, which is more characterized by pathological sleepiness during the day, falling asleep all the time, I can then refer people appropriately. And if they have insomnia, I can help them with that. We walk through a full assessment, full diary analysis, a full health review, and I like to set people up for success by starting where they need to start, as opposed to starting with, on session one we do this, and on session two we do that. It's not that prescriptive.
Yeah.
And I work to support them using those principles with the kind of coaching hats to kind of cheerlead them on and give them that support. So implementing it is not as scary as it might sound like it would be if they were just reading about it online.
Sure. And is there a normal amount of time people spend with you? I would guess that everybody is different. And their insomnia comes from many different for many different reasons. But is there a standard time that people generally work with you, Tracy?
People have underlying anxiety disorders, or if people have a history, just their personality, they are extremely controlling or perfectionistic,
Yeah.
it can take some time to unwind the need to control. That underpins a lot of the work that I do. We can influence sleep, and we can set a stage for sleep by working on the mindset and working on the biology, which we can talk about if you like. But the idea that we're going to step back and let go of control of it is the hardest part and can take different people different lengths of time. So um, I have worked with people over one session. I've worked with people over two sessions. I've worked with people over 8 or 9 sessions. So it varies quite a lot. And the biggest difference is whether or not there's an underlying anxiety issue or
Yes.
not.
And so
Mhm.
that's probably where your experience in psychology comes into effect. I mean, you're able to maybe get down to the nitty gritty and maybe understand it better than a lot of people could
No, I
understand.
can, yeah. I mean, I can't because I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a mental health clinician. I can't quote unquote treat people's underlying anxiety disorders as
Yeah.
an example. But I've had enough experience now in the sleep world that I know what it looks like when
Mhm.
somebody kind of crosses that threshold where I can't tell them exactly what is going on. I can't diagnose them. I can't treat them for it, but I know it's outside of my wheelhouse. And I don't want people to sign up to work with me if I can't help them. It's not good for either of us, really. I don't want people to delay a diagnosis, delay appropriate treatment. That said, anxiety and sleep go hand in hand, but helping the sleep can also help the anxiety. So sometimes it's about finding, is that person in the sweet spot where if we can improve their sleep, their anxiety will ease off? Or is their anxiety too over the threshold to begin working on the sleep just yet?
Hmm. It's a pretty deep subject, obviously. But hey, listen, one of the things I have to ask you is I've seen
Mhm.
on our phones. There's apps that you can get to track your sleep, and I've seen them.
Yep.
You can put it bedside, and it'll give you a review in the morning of how you slept, the number of hours, all that stuff.
Mhm.
Is there any merit to those? And do you suggest maybe looking into those without, specifying a certain brand or an app or whatever? Are those
Mm.
helpful in your practice that you find?
They are generally not helpful for a few reasons. I wear one, but I don't wear it for that. Um, they are not accurate. That's one big problem with them. They also miss out the subjective experience that somebody is having with their sleep. I might ask my partner, "How'd you sleep last night?" And he now feels like he needs to check his fancy watch in order to tell me. We want to get back into touch with our sleepy feelings and what it feels like to get good quality sleep or not good quality sleep, and to not let the devices tell us. So, aside from the fact that they aren't accurate, they provide a lot of information, which is really interesting. And so people can start focusing on all of those really interesting factoids, particularly sleep stages, and they're not accurate. And they wouldn't necessarily know how to apply them anyway. And I'll give you a really great example. I've had people come to me very concerned that they do not get 100% deep sleep.
Okay.
If somebody got 100% deep sleep, I would be very, very worried about them, because even in our 20s and 30s, we're still spending 50% of our night in light sleep, or more than that in light sleep. And then it changes across the lifespan. If you put somebody who is in their 80s in a sleep lab and they have no deep sleep, that would not be surprising or be considered unusual. So, A, the information's not right. B, it gets taken out of context and we don't know how to apply it. But in terms of my practice, that kind of information is really limited in terms of how it can help me help that person get better sleep. We really need to know how long they've been asleep, how long they've been awake, how long they've been in bed. We can get that from doing more manual tracking. And I think these things just ramp up people's sleep anxiety. They start spending all their days, analyzing what their app says.
Sure.
Whereas I'm able to step back and look at the trends. They are better at some things than others, but I don't like to use them, and I don't like to suggest that people use them if they're having sleep trouble, just because they create a little bit of fixation.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's really tempting to look at it in the middle of the night.
Mm,
And knowing you're awake at 3 o'clock doesn't do anything to help you get back to sleep. It only can wind you up.
sure.
you know,
And I can certainly understand what you're saying. It's like if your heart is racing, well, it's one thing to know that your heart is racing. It's another thing to know what do you do next to prevent a problem with it, and finding somebody who can analyze it properly and look at it rather than just going, oh, this says that I turned 14 times during the night and whatever,
Mhm.
it might be. Um, so that's great to know. So one of the problems I have, and I think maybe a lot of people have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is is racing brain, is
Yes.
is not being able to shut this thing off. Even though I'm older, I still have, a passion for a lot of things in my life, and I'm thinking
Mhm.
about what can I do next? Not necessarily what do I have to do next, but what can we do at night? What can be done about it to slow a racing brain down to so I can get good night's sleep?
Right. When we think about the sleep cycle, we are starting in the morning, and that goes for sleep drive and our circadian rhythm and our mental state. And so when people have a racing brain, because we start in the morning when we are looking at sleep, I look at ways to try to help people compartmentalize all of that activity that's in there. I'm a little bit inclined that way, especially right now. I've got loads of ideas, and kind of life is exciting, and you don't want to take your teeth out of the stuff that excites you, right?
Yeah.
But I think creating compartments for that stuff so that it doesn't creep into the evening and make it more likely to creep into the sleep is part of the solution. Um, Literally giving yourself processing time, say right after dinner or right before dinner, where you're looking at you're looking at you're looking at your plans, you're looking at all of the stuff that you want to do. You're actually concretely, if you use an online planner, you're sitting there and you're moving things around in the diary. Maybe if there's something emotional going on, you're writing about it. You're giving it the time, because that racing brain is actually a function of our safety system. That's the way I think of it anyway.
Okay.
It's almost like I don't have to do anything now. My head's on the pillow, my body is tired, and it says, don't forget about this, and don't forget about that. And it's because it knows these things are important to us and they're meaningful to us.
Exactly.
So we can't turn our safety brain off, but what we can do is show it, look, I'm going to give you some time, I'm going to give you some energy, I'm going to listen to all the things that you're throwing at me. I'm going to spend some time doing that every single day so that you don't need to bleed into my nighttime.
Mm,
So that's one way of creating a little bit of a compartmentalization. And it's almost a training process. It's not a quick fix. It's not just a brain dump. Although if you have stuff to dump out, it's helpful to do that. It's retraining that piece of the brain to say, you've got a compartment, you're legitimate. I'm not trying to get rid of you, but actually the nighttime is not where you belong. In my run up to bed, this is not where these things belong. You combine that with finding something else to do that occupies your attention. And for people who are sleeping less, that is sometimes a challenge. Or if you are a night owl and everybody else goes to bed, you have this time to yourself in the evening.
mhm,
Finding a way to do something that you enjoy, that is relaxing, that does not, we all have enjoyable things that get our brain going.
mhm,
And we all have things, or if we don't have them, we need to find them in a situation like that. Things that relax us, that don't get the brain going, and to literally purposefully turn our back to that kind of safety brain voice and go and do those things. A little bit distracting, a little bit engaging, but relaxing.
mm,
We don't want to engage in those things in the middle of the night. In the beginning, those things will come anyway,
mhm.
just because it's the habit. Your body and brain say, "Oh, I lay down, I put my head on the pillow, and then I solve all the world's problems, or I think about all the world's problems, or I make all the plans for the next year, or whatever." It takes
Yeah.
time to break that habit. So we just kind of quietly redirect our attention to other things that are not as engaging with that safety brain.
Yeah. I found personally that journaling when I can't sleep because my mind is racing, I get out of bed because there's no reason to stay there for an hour and a half, rolling around thinking about things. And
Yep.
for me, I found that just dumping some of that onto paper
Mhm.
has helped me get rid of it for
Mhm.
that time and tell myself, here's what's bothering me, or here's what's inspiring me in the middle of the night to think, uh, but I'm going to get to it tomorrow. And so
Yes.
I know I'm not going to forget it. So I
I
find,
will do I do the same exact thing. And those two are really powerful in combination, especially before we get the safety brain trained. Um, so I've got mine pretty well trained, but we all have some things that just are hard to put in that compartment. And if I wake up and my brain is doing that, I kind of know, even if I can't read what I wrote, if I roll over and write it down,
yeah,
my brain goes, okay, yeah, she's got it. And then it quietens down. So
yeah.
it's a really good thing to do if that stuff starts to creep back in, especially before you kind of train it that it has a compartment so that it doesn't interfere so much.
Yeah, and I think one of the worst things you can do is to grab some device that lights up, right, and then turns your brain back on when it's half asleep. So I leave my phone alone. I leave the TV off, and just do it with paper that doesn't light up and doesn't distract me. But I know there's a term called sleep procrastination. wh-
Mm-hmm.
People it seems to be a growing concern that. So, what advice do you have for seniors, especially seniors who find themselves delaying sleep, and how can they cultivate a healthier bedtime routine? What suggestions would you have,
Mm.
especially for us old folks, us seniors?
Yeah, sleep procrastination is a real big thief of sleep. A lot of my world is insomnia related, which is when you want to sleep but you can't. Sleep procrastination is you could sleep but you're not, you're doing something else. And A lot of times, again, if we go back to the morning time, it's about creating compartments for the things we really want to do. So if there's something you really want to do and you find that that particular thing is the thing that entices you and you stay with it and you kind of get into flow and you don't want to stop, that is something that we need to really prioritize to have happen earlier in the day. And that includes seniors and anybody else who work as well. It's about finding a time where that can happen because there's an itch that those things scratch. um, it's a hobby or it's a project. It's something that keeps us flowing into past the time where we would normally feel sleepy and then go to sleep.
Yes.
But we have to honor the fact that whatever it is, there's something really important about doing that, and we have to give it a time to do it so that it doesn't happen at night. There are structural things that we can do, particularly since the pandemic. This has been an issue for people who work from home. Oh, I don't know what to do with myself. I guess I'll go open up the laptop and check my emails. Or if you have a dedicated place for that activity to happen, whether it's work or a hobby or anything else, and it's behind another door, if you're lucky enough to have like a separate working space in your home or a separate crafting space, a man cave, a woman cave, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
where you can shut the door and then you shut the door and you turn your back to it and you set an emotional intention for the next thing that you're going to do, which hopefully will not be nearly as stimulating as the thing that you were procrastinating about. And that's how you spend your evening. A lot of people ask me, what's the best evening routine? It doesn't include things that get you into flow, right? So binging on binging on one of these programs. Television, when I look at I think of television, I think of, you use the clicker and you stand up and used to go over and have to do it manually, but you use the clicker and you go and you find a show.
You're not
There
that old that you would even know that.
Oh yes, I am.
No.
So but there are very algorithmic platforms out there that go, oh, how about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Those can be slippery slopes at night as well because that is algorithmic flow. So we try to keep those things away from the later evening and doing things that, again, I love to knit.
Uh-huh.
That is my relaxing mindfulness type of activity that kind of slows me down. I also love genetic genealogy, but if I choose to do that, I'm going to wake up thinking about, oh, such and such, there was a connection there and there, my brain will just be going. We have to reserve time for those flow environments inside of us for someplace else, because those passions are great. Those are the things that make us feel really vital and really alive. So we need to give them time and nurture those, but maybe not after dinner.
Sure. And you
Yeah.
call those what? Flow what?
I
What
call them like flow activities.
flow activities?
Yeah. It's if you sat down and made a list of all the things that you love doing, some of them are going to be flow activities that get your energy higher and up, and you get really into it and you're digging and digging and digging.
Sure.
Other things are going to be relaxing, but they're not going to have that characteristic. And that characteristic is what leads to sleep procrastination.
Huh.
I don't know many people who procrastinate about sleep because they're desperate to clean the silverware drawer, right? It's usually something else.
Yeah. Talking about flow activities, one of the things that I know over the years happened with my sleep is music. Because for me, this may sound really weird and maybe the first time you've ever heard it, but I studied music in college. And part of the study of music was breaking down the structure of music. And so
Mm,
what I found in my music studies is that um, it's really hampered my enjoyment for music now because I'm constantly, when I listen to music,
you're
I'm
thinking.
breaking it down.
Mm,
So in some people, might pick up, I've got guitarists might pick up a guitar and, relaxing, just kind of sit back and play. But for me, it's like I'm analyzing, I'm in a different flow that really takes that part, that enjoyment out for me. But that's my own personal issues
Yeah,
that,
those sorts of things happens. I'm a qualified osteopath here in the UK, and it's very difficult to go and get a massage because I'm thinking about their technique and this and
yeah,
that and the other.
yeah, exactly. So that takes all the enjoyment right out of it, right? Because you're analyzing them.
It's
Um,
hard to not, it's hard to not have that switched on.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, I understand. So let's talk a little bit, if we could, about nightmares and solutions, because nightmares are can be distressing at any age, whether we're young or whether we're old. Can you elaborate on whether they can be treated with any methods that you might recommend for nightmares that seniors are experiencing in their lives, maybe outside of PTSD or things like that, but could you touch on nightmares?
Yeah. Nightmares are really interesting. If we think of thought patterns, repetitive thought patterns, as a bit of a habit in the brain, we can approach those thought habits and those thought loops in the brain with nightmares as well. And we can find a way to circumvent those, um, particularly for repetitive nightmares. This actually works best for repetitive nightmares,
Okay.
where there's a repetitive theme or repetitive content. Um, Essentially, the brain gets stuck on replay, and it gets stuck on replay because of the emotional tone of what's happening. And so, imagery rehearsal therapy is an evidence based approach for working with repetitive nightmares. Safe for everybody to do. It's easy to learn. It just takes a lot of time to practice it, but it essentially takes the story of the nightmare and separates it from the emotional content so that the brain is less likely to replay it. It's almost like we get to a certain part of our sleep cycles in the night, and it's almost like it goes, oh, this is where I make that connection, and then this story plays. And it's more likely to play if there's emotional content. So if we can teach ourselves in the daytime to have a less emotional reaction to it
Hmm.
by rewriting the story,
Hmm.
the brain will start the loop, but it will begin to practice the new story that doesn't have the emotional content. And then it will be less likely to keep replaying the story.
Is that all about subconscious? Are we talking about subconscious
It,
thinking?
it is it it's more psychology than like subconscious type of stuff. But
Okay.
if you if you have a way of thinking about something and it's been a habit of yours to think about that in that way,
Yeah.
and you have a new experience that changes how you think about it, it's really difficult to go back to the old way of thinking.
Okay.
If you've it's like suddenly a light bulb has gone off, and you say to yourself, "Oh, that person doesn't have that reaction over here. That person isn't angry because of that. It's not because they're a jerk.
Uh,
It's because they're really traumatized by that situation." So you then have compassion. Your reaction to it's different in light of the new information.
mm-hmm.
So imagery rehearsal is essentially taking the story and rewriting it to give the brain a new story.
Hmm.
And like anything we practice, our brain gets better with it over time. So you practice the new story, practice. And then the brain says, oh, I started this story because it's my habit to, but now I'm telling the story that I've been practicing all the time.
Wow. So it requires a little bit of work,
It
right?
does require some work. Yes, absolutely.
Some work
There
and
are things that look like nightmares that are not necessarily nightmares. There's nightmare disorder, which tends to be more severe, treated more medically, but you can use imagery rehearsal as well. Night terrors can look like nightmares to the outside. The difference between night terrors and nightmares is that people remember the content of nightmares, but they don't remember content from night terrors because they happen in a different part of sleep.
hmm. Okay.
And with seniors, there's a special variety of increasingly common, it looks like nightmares from the outside, but is actually, it's something called REM behavior disorder. And that is also very treatable, and it should be treated. This would look more like somebody fighting in their sleep. Like it very commonly presents as fighting off an attacker, but they
Uh-huh.
are physically moving and punch. They stay in bed, so they're not sleepwalking. They stay in bed, and they are fighting this imaginary person, or whatever it is that they're fighting off. But it can be dangerous for a bed partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't want to have any sad stories, right? So it's best to get that kind of thing treated.
Yeah. Interesting. So we touched maybe a little bit on napping. Okay.
Mhm.
When I take a nap during the day, I almost feel guilty, and um, I, I I feel like I'm not as strong as I should be if I nap. I don't want to be judged that I'm lazy or that I don't need a nap. Or so let's talk about naps because I think they can be a double-edged sword. I think they can help us and in certain circumstances they're beneficial, but maybe they're not always beneficial. I don't know. So talk to me about naps, especially with seniors, if you can, and if there
Yeah.
is a differentiation.
I think across the board, you're right. Naps can cut both ways, and it depends on how somebody is sleeping otherwise. So, a person who gets enough sleep and they sleep fine at night, an occasional nap is not going to create a problem.
Hmm.
If people are napping during the day and they have poor sleep at night, napping is not a good idea, because what we want to do is we want to have that block of sleep that somebody may be having in the afternoon, and we want that to happen at night so that that person
Yeah,
can have a more satisfying, less frustrating block of sleep.
I think about that all the time. If I start dozing off, that I shouldn't do this. I should be saving this for the nighttime
Mm.
when I
If
need.
if people have difficulty with their sleep, it's one of the first things that's recommended is to avoid napping unless it's for safety. You're if you're dozing off and you're going to have to get in the car and go for a long drive down a straight road, taking the edge off the sleepiness takes about 20 minutes, which is very different from having a 2 hour nap in the afternoon, right?
Sure.
So um, we always nap for safety. I suggest people set an alarm. I suggest
Okay.
people have the nap as early in the day as possible so that they can continue to build up enough sleep drive for the night. It's more seniors have more naps because they have more opportunity to
Yeah.
nap,
Yes.
and it creates, I think, special problems for the older populations, because if you think about a newborn, they're awake for about 10 minutes and then they're asleep again. Right? They're only awake for a little. It doesn't take them very long to build up enough sleep drive to fall asleep. As we get older, our trajectory into sleep, our sleep drive looks a little bit more like skipping a rock on a lake. We go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And that trajectory gets flatter and flatter if we take longer and longer naps during the day. Our sleep will become more broken and lighter than it could be if we're taking naps in the afternoon.
So would you say, and I think, as I'm thinking this through listening to you, a lot of the naps that I take in the afternoon have to do with boredom. Do you think that's
Yep.
correct? I'm really not
Yeah.
tired. I'm just kind
Mhm.
of bored, and well, this chair is awfully comfortable, and it's awfully quiet. I think this is perfect. See you later. Bye, and I'm out of here. So,
Yeah.
recommend that people get up and move when.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Social factors and sleep play a big part. And obviously, if you are an older person and you don't have a 9 to 5 and you don't have enough to kind of keep you busy during the day, or maybe your mobility is limited, so you're a bit more physically inactive during the day, it's trickier to kind of avoid naps, right? But if you can, having activities to keep you engaged and active during the day to avoid that. Social activity in particular is excellent for people's brains. Physical activity, social activity, those tend to be things that go out the window when we don't sleep well. Those also tend to be the things that go out the window when we're not feeling well, or when we are older and our circle of friends have moved away or other things have happened. We become a little bit more isolated.
Yes.
I'm in my 50s and I feel like my world is smaller than it was in my 30s.
Yeah.
Um, Simply because life has changed and the rhythm of life has changed and it will continue to change.
Yeah.
A lot of people go to bed earlier than they ought to. And I'm thinking of myself sometimes too, particularly in the winter, because I don't want to do the things that really engage me and get me really wound up and excited.
Uh-huh.
But if I don't feel like doing something else, I go, I'm a little bored and I go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't have sleeping difficulty. So that doesn't tend to come bite me. Whereas it could create problems for someone who is having sleeping difficulty. It could make that worse for them.
Sure. Where do you think, it wasn't something that I had written down to ask you, but as we're talking, how does loneliness fit into to sleep? Do you have an overall thought about how loneliness might affect, especially senior adults who have maybe lost a spouse, or in my
Mhm.
community, I live in a what's called a Del Webb community, which is made up of seniors. There's
Mhm.
about 400 seniors that live around me, and a lot of them are all by themselves. And there are activities, right, so they don't experience loneliness, but I think a lot do. How might loneliness, not to spring a question on you that we hadn't talked about, or maybe
It's
I
an important one.
is it?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think people don't honor how corrosive loneliness can be for our physical health and our mental health.
Yes.
Um, if we're lonely, it means we're not going out. Usually, it means we're
Hmm.
staying within our four walls, which
Yeah.
has a lot of impacts in terms of sleep. It impacts sleep drive because the more active you can be, the better. The lack of social engagement that usually comes that creates that loneliness is really not good for our mental health. And when our mental health suffers, our sleep suffers, and vice versa.
Sure.
Our 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 brain health, people worry about, a lot of people will worry about and come to me, I'm worried about my brain, because I'm not sleeping very well. In the moment, we cannot control the sleep. We can help do things to set a stage. But the things we can control are things like our physical activity and our social activity.
Mm.
And if losing those two things has a big impact on our body and on our mental well being. Um, I think being in a community like you're in is great because there are opportunities,
Yeah.
especially if you have a neighbor that's willing to drag you out of your shell, so that
Yeah.
way you can become a little bit more comfortable doing these things.
Hmm.
But I think about a lot of people like in inner cities living in blocks, and or living way out in the countryside on their own,
Yes.
and they literally don't have anybody
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of sleep, aside from the things we've already talked about, what else are you going to do all day if you
Mm.
don't have something that means something to you and other people aren't reaching out to you to help break that shell of that loneliness? You're
Yeah.
going to sleep.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it's so important, especially for seniors, to find something that they have a passion for, that a reason, something where they can reach out and be with people. I mean, there's so many places you can go where organizations need help.
Mm-hmm.
They need people. And I think that's one, don't sit in
Yeah.
your house alone and
Finding a way to give back. And if people
yeah,
struggle with things like internet access or the technology to access,
yeah,
as far as I know, they still have computers in them, and there are people there that can help you. Like, oh, I think I might want to learn how to do something.
uh-huh,
Well, you can learn anything on YouTube.
sure,
If you don't have somebody to help set up a laptop for you, you can learn by starting by going to the library.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
We're almost out of time, but there's something I wrote down from your website that was interesting
Mm,
to me. And I don't know if you'd like to comment on it or not, but one of the things that I read was more than half of older adults complain about sleep difficulties, and more than 20% may have sleep apnea. So
mm.
what do you recommend? I mean, I don't think everybody should run to have a sleep study done, but how serious is sleep apnea, and how can we guard against it being a problem that that we look away from and say, I don't have that? What is there something we should be doing to
Hmm.
prevent damage to us from sleep apnea?
Yeah, sleep apnea is a really interesting one because a lot of people associate, well, I've got poor sleep, so I must have insomnia. But there's a good chunk of those people who have sleep apnea, and it shows up very differently. Insomnia is tired and wired.
Yes,
Sleep apnea is being pathologically sleepy during the day, and it has health consequences, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So fending off those health consequences is a big deal, because if you treat sleep apnea, those risks, they go away,
Go away.
and it's very treatable. Um, a lot of people look at treatment for sleep apnea and they think, I have to wear a Darth Vader mask at night and I'm never going to be able to sleep doing that, right? The technology has come a long way. Some people won't need a mask at all.
Yeah.
They are often smaller, and you can be trained to use one. It is like any other medical intervention. If you suddenly discovered you had severe hypertension, would you not treat it?
Hmm.
It is a legitimate medical condition, um, and it's really really important to treat it.
Yeah.
It becomes more common for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's weight gain, but not always. I know some very slim people who have sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Women who are menopausal and postmenopausal is the fastest growing group of people who develop sleep apnea, and that's because of the estrogen changes, changing the tissue tone in their body throughout. I
Mhm.
mean, myself, I'm like, where's that skin on my knee come from? It just grew there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it affects our throats as well. Um, yeah, I would say if you feel extremely sleepy during the day, you're complaining of poor quality sleep at night. If you snore, if
Yes.
you wake up with headaches, or if you're waking up many, many times to go to the loo at night, to urinate at night,
Hmm.
those are all kind of flags for sleep apnea. And you don't always need a sleep study to diagnose it. There are home tests that are available that are now extremely reliable. Um, I'm a little bit of a cynic when it comes to um, access to certain kinds of healthcare diagnostics that might not necessarily be necessary, but somebody gets to bill for those. So sleep studies are expensive. Somebody gets to bill for that. There are
Sure.
less costly options. And if people really want to do a home test, you can often get your own if you've got the funds for it. And if you get it from a reputable place, they will have somebody who can evaluate it.
Right.
And then you can go down that route.
Good. Interesting. So we're almost at the end of our time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for those that are watching. So now I can say that if people want information about you and how you can help them and to learn more, I just put in to my browser Tracy the sleep coach, and bam, you pop up all over the place. If I can find you. Is that the best place for people to reach you, just by going to the browser and putting in Tracy the sleep coach?
Yeah, that's an easy way to find where I'm at. I'm on LinkedIn and Threads and Facebook and Instagram, and I dabble in different things and spend different amounts of energy in those different places.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's the same handle everywhere, including on YouTube. If anybody wanted to have a free 20-minute chat about their sleep, I also have a link for that on my website, which is tracythesleepcoach.co.uk. Zero pressure. And even if you don't work with me, I still plant a tree. I plant a tree for every call that I make. I'm going to have a podcast coming out relatively soon as well. And I'm going to, on my launch day, have a tree planted for every download. So really
In,
excited to plant lots of trees this year.
in that project, I had it written down. I can't find it. What is that project called? It's the tree planting thing. There's a name for it that I found.
Oh, the Sleep for Trees initiative is what
Sleep,
I'm calling it.
yeah, sleep
Yes.
for trees.
Yeah, there are a lot of different organizations that partner with businesses to plant trees, and this is just one that it's a UK based one that I chose. And I decided for anybody that has an interaction with me, I'm going to plant a tree.
Well, that's fantastic. So what one question should I have asked and that you were expecting and hoping that I asked that I haven't asked? What could you add here at the end that might be beneficial to those watching and listening today?
My number one sleep tip for anybody that's having difficulty with their sleep is to not check the time at night.
Hmm. Okay. That's a tough one.
Checking the time in the middle of the night is not helpful. And
That,
it's one of the key causes of sleep related anxiety.
exactly. That could.
And that just winds. Nobody wakes up at 3 a.m. and goes, yes, I've gotten 2 hours of sleep. Well, I mean, very rarely will you find somebody that says that.
Yeah.
Knowing that at the moment doesn't do anything for us except give us trouble.
Yeah. Great tip. Well, Tracy, thank you so much joining me from the UK and at dinner time. So it's time to eat some dinner for you, I guess. And I know people have enjoyed this and will enjoy it more. Tracy, the sleep coach, is where people need to go. Your website has so much information and so full to help people. Um, they'll benefit by going there. And to reach out to you for a complimentary consultation, I think would be a smart idea for a lot of people. And not only would they get some help, maybe for any sleep issues, but they'll meet a very nice person and
Oh, mhm.
somebody I think that might be able to help them. So, Stacy, stay put. I'm going to fade this out, and thank you so much for joining. And I hope we have the ability to meet again. Uh,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much. We'll talk soon.